I'm Nikki Usher. I'm an assistant professor at the George Washington School of Media and Public Affairs in Washington. I think that journalism is looking for ways to save itself, both in terms of authority and in terms of revenue. So out of the dust emerges this really cool way of telling stories, and in fact a really cool way of telling stories that may even be more data-driven and more immersive, that get people to spend time on the page. And so you have, with every new news innovation, there's this great chorus of, well, maybe this will save journalism. And so from this rose the myth of the interactive journalist or the hacker journalist as the unicorn, and that's how sometimes people talk about it, the unicorn that would bridge editorial with the technical and save journalism. Now, one of the problems is, of course, that nothing can save journalism, because I think it's a bit of a fallacy. I don't really think that journalism needs saving. I think it just needs some changing, and it is changing. But there are some problems because a lot of journalists don't really understand, A, what advantages programming culture can bring into the newsroom, and B, some of the more heavy statistical analysis is something that journalists aren't really good at and have trouble presenting. And so I think that the potential for misinformation really exists even as we try to make stories more engaging. So the 2016 election, every election is a great opportunity for interactive and data journalism because you know it's coming. So you can plan your most ambitious projects, and that's what a lot of people are going to be paying attention to. One of the things we learned is even if we knew about the complexities of the data and even the complexities of something like depicting a Trump rally, for example, in 360-degree view, some of the problems with that is it oversimplifies in the act of making something more engaging. And that's really concerning because it can lead to faulty assumptions and a faulty sense of certainty that may not really be there, and it actually, that exposure of uncertainty may even be in text. But I think that it provides an oversimplification of storytelling that we need to really guard against. I think there are a couple of things that both students and professionals can think about in terms of using data journalism and interactive journalism in their work. And I think that it's one of these things is, what can this form of news do for the audience that all other forms of journalism cannot? And focus on telling the story in that way. Think about the strengths that it provides. Also think about the cultural legacy that technology can bring into the newsroom and be an agent of change. I think that's really important too. Push newsrooms to think a little bit differently. And I think those are really at the core, beyond learning skills, beyond critiquing data journalism. It's about, at the core, how can this change journalism? How can this improve journalism? What can this do for the reader and for the user and for the news consumer and the viewer? And I think that's where you need to start thinking. Quantification is great. I think it's really important to have number-backed journalism, data-driven backed journalism, journalism that does take social science approaches to news. But I think the problem is that people don't really think about where that data comes from and what that data, what implicit assumptions may be contained within that data. And I think all data, there's a great quote that I talked about in my talk about how all data journalism is opinion journalism. And part of that is really understanding how variables are created, for example, at the very core. And then you go on and make choices about what you compute and what you visualize. And so all of those are decisions that render pure quantification with values. I think that journalism is facing two really big challenges. The first is, what do we do about the fact that the news organizations that are best poised to succeed are on the coasts and have big brand names that can attract top talent, not just in reporting and editing and production, but also in terms of technical stuff. As a technologist who maybe would be making more money at a startup, I'd much rather work for the New York Times or CNN than I would for a small local news organization. So there's an inequity in terms of talent and resources. There's also a problem that emerges as news organizations become more technically minded, and those go back to a much longer history of structural forces that make it hard for women to really be engaged in technology. So I think we have to be, there are a lot of problems with diversity in the newsroom to begin with, and I think as journalism becomes more technical, we need to really be on guard for making sure that those inequities in terms of gender and race don't get even further structurally enshrined in newsrooms. I just really want to thank the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication for having me here, because it's really fun to demystify media as part of this series.